How does the rapidly evolving landscape of cryptocurrency and blockchain challenge government regulations? I'm Mike Loader, and this is Crypto Corner. Hello and welcome back to Crypto Corner, presented by the team at BTC Markets, where each episode we go into details about how the crypto market is trending at the moment. All right, let's explore the rapid evolution of Bitcoin and, of course, the cryptocurrency industry, shedding light on the future of the blockchain space and its relationship with government regulations. Joining me in the studio is my co-host, Carolyn Bowler, CEO of BTC Markets. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us.
Can you tell me a little bit about the topic that I've mentioned at the top of all this? Because I know there's still people out there who are watching the crypto space, they're on the fence, and of course the governments are watching as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So regulation is the key cornerstone, I think, for the future of cryptocurrency, and certainly the industry in Australia has been agitating for appropriate and proportionate regulation of our sector for a number of years, and we're edging ever closer. And certainly as we look overseas, we can see that that's the trend from international markets, but coming for Australia and coming very soon.
Okay, let's jump into our guest for the show. Who have you brought with us today?
Up next is Steve Vallas, who is the Managing Director of Blockchain APAC.
Let's bring him in. Steve, it's good to see you. Thanks for your time.
I appreciate the invitation.
Now, let's start off. How has Bitcoin and I guess cryptocurrency industry evolved so rapidly? I was covering a lot of it in 2020 when it was sort of riding the high waves, but what have you guys witnessed? I'm interested to hear.
It's been a long ride, and simultaneously seems like it's been an instant. I think the conversations, as far back for me in 2016 or 2017, involved regulation, and we find ourselves in 2024, and we're almost there. So it's been an interesting contrast. Everyone thought we'd get here quickly. We're still not there, but I think the roadmap, the direction of travel, I think with respect to the regulatory frameworks for countries like Australia are now well and truly in train.
Just with that, Steve, a lot of the regulators talk about this concept of safe innovation. What are your thoughts on that? And certainly, how does the industry itself respond?
There are challenges because there are two competing aims there, Caroline. You want to protect consumers. That's the primary focus. Every jurisdiction looks to protect consumers. Most obviously, we see that with the SEC in the United States. That's a remit. In the United States in particular, they also have a capital formation remit where they're trying to encourage innovation. In other jurisdictions like Australia, they're not so clearly defined. Consumer protections tend to dominate that landscape. So there's a sense that there's a push-pull. And so you really do need domain experience. You need to understand the risks properly. And often people will speak to the concept of tech neutrality, but it's very difficult to be neutral if you don't understand the technology that you're being asked to consider and to regulate.
Which is why education is obviously so important in this space. Steve, I'm curious to know what the future holds for the blockchain, and of course we'll talk about Web3 as well, because all of that's tied into this. Tell us a little bit more.
Education's a funny thing here. I mean, invariably, those who want to be educated seek to be educated. Most people have a reasonable sense of self when it comes to this subject matter, so they don't really dive in to the topic. When you talk about things, particularly with respect to things like scams, most people don't think they're ever going to be scammed. So they don't tend to look for information that makes them less susceptible to being scammed. So I've been chatting much more about collaboration and coordination because education is a very difficult concept to penetrate for most people.
And just with that, Blockchain APAC, has a relationship with regulators all over the world. Yeah, how would you describe its role and what are you seeing kind of internationally?
Caroline, this is so complicated for everybody. I mean, the truth of the conversations I was having back in 2017 and 2018 was that everyone didn't think they'd need to resource it the way they have. They didn't think it was going to be this big. They didn't think it was going to be this complex. And so they find themselves challenged because almost everybody is under-resourced. And I think often from an industry perspective, you underappreciate, or people fail to appreciate, that this could be a full-time job for most people, but it's a subset of what the regulators are doing. So when I find myself chatting to regulators across jurisdictions, across the region, across the globe, they're all still trying to figure this out. And then you have to add into that the tremendous complexity of the cross-border implications. Normally, in a regulatory sense, you can control your borders. This technology makes that very difficult, and so it's a different challenge for regulators to face.
Just on that, Steve, how is the relationship between the blockchain space and government regulations changing? How are they keeping up with all of this?
I don't think anyone keeps up. I think that's the truth. You have to skip things in order to stay across, and you have this challenge, which is you need to be across the detail, you need to go wide, and invariably you also need to go deep. When you meet people in the space, they tend to do one or the other. They don't often do both. So information sharing is a critical thing, and this is where trust, ironically, a topic and a word that's used across the sector is the real challenge. Often people think there's a gotcha moment coming, there's a reason you're not sharing information, and there hasn't been enough sort of trust, I think, across industry and government. But I think that's changing. I think the signs are positive here. There's a recognition that it has to happen, and it will happen.
You've got a bird's eye view of the industry kind of worldwide, and it's been a number of years, Steve. I mean, you've been around this space. You're one of the OGs really at this stage, certainly in Australia. What do you see are the trends then for 24? If you leave perhaps the topic of regulation to one side, what are the other trends that you're seeing?
I think initially we thought there were going to be entirely new regimes for this subject matter. And I think the complexity of new regimes and largely the time it would take to implement them means that most jurisdictions are saying, how does this fit? Or how does this come close to fitting? And so I think a lot of jurisdictions now are having to deal with the fact that things will not fit perfectly, but they're largely going to be consistent with the existing rules. And that's what's happening at the moment. I think there's a recognition, if there's greater coordination through agencies like in Australia, ASIC and the SEC globally, we can get this done much, much faster. So that's how I'm seeing it play out. More familiar than you would otherwise think, which actually is a bonus, because it means a lot of the traditional finance businesses don't feel so far removed from this conversation because they're familiar with the regulatory frameworks that are being proposed.
Steve, you talked about the sort of rapid change we're seeing. What factors have contributed to the evolution and, I guess, uptake of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency industry?
I think a lot of people in universities will be writing papers about this for decades to come. People think about money differently. They think about value differently. When you ask a 20-year-old who spends a lot of time on TikTok what they perceive as valuable and how they want to engage and how they want to trade anything, how they want to trade any value, it's invariably through a device, which they're very familiar and comfortable with. If you ask people mostly my age, they'll tell you they do things a particular way. It is email, it is traditionally send the letter, go to the trusted financial advisor. The way people consume information has changed a lot. And so I often say to people, if you don't spend a lot of time with 18 to 20-year-olds who are on devices all day, every day, then how do you know what they know and how do you understand what they understand? And people are very quick to offer views, but rarely dive in to pay attention to the way people are revisiting these sorts of concepts.
Very well said by you. Let's talk about the future of the cryptocurrency industry, and I guess when it comes to being influenced by government regulations. I know it's a tall order for these teams to come together and sort of, how's it going to work? Especially you touched on the international nature of all of this. Talk to me about the influence of the government.
I think the government will be influenced by economic incentives. The reality here is those who have had success financially, we're one of those countries, Australia, the United States, the UK, a lot of traditional sort of success. Countries that feel like they've missed out economically are incentivised to participate much more readily. Things like the things we take for granted, mobile devices, great connectivity, good banking services, fast payments. Many jurisdictions don't have that. And a lot of this technology offers an opportunity to bypass and leapfrog. So I think you're finding emerging countries, emerging economies, much more willing to embrace the opportunities of technology. And that's lost on most people because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's the kind of adage that sometimes means that you get left behind.
And if I may just on that, ask a question around your relationships with Africa. I know that you're probably one of the most well-travelled and well-connected people within cryptocurrency worldwide. Just on that theme about where it has been broken and it is being fixed, can you talk about any of the examples you've seen in Africa on that particular topic?
Just payments, Caroline, how people make payments. When you don't have reliable networks that we take for granted, how do you transfer value? And invariably it's through your phone. And whether it's data packets that you pay for in a particular way or whether it's just the information or the data that comes with your phone, you become familiar with that mechanism of exchange. And that's why I think you're seeing things in the African continent, which most people wouldn't give any consideration to, where they store money a particular way or they store value or they transact or they find value in different things. They start trading things as a proxy for money. And when you have economies where the value of the currency goes up and down wildly, there is an appeal for something like Bitcoin, or there's an appeal for something that is potentially even a meme coin. You just know that the value that is the traditional value ascribed might be a little bit more variable. So in a funny way, we look at these things and say the currency is not particularly volatile compared to something else. But in other jurisdictions where inflation runs incredibly high, you might find that, no, it's actually a better option if it only moves 20 or 30 or 50 or 100%.
Interesting. Steve, I'm curious to know a little bit about cybersecurity. It's always in the news in relation to these things and scams and whatnot. What's the relationship between the blockchain space and government regulations when it comes to protecting people's transactions and whatnot?
Cybersecurity is a fraught subject matter. I dealt a lot with cybersecurity experts when I used to be in my previous role, and we're talking to the government about how cyber was viewed. Cybersecurity people generally, and this is a generalisation, don't think that much of blockchain and crypto. They think it's something I don't need to worry about. Whereas people in the blockchain and crypto space are always worried about cybersecurity. There are so many attack vectors. There are so many attempts here to disrupt, so many attempts to hack. They're always thinking about it. It's funny, those two conversations rarely come together. So there's a disconnect. And I think that's the role the government needs to play. They need to make people aware of the fact that this is how money and value will move in the future. So ignoring it because it doesn't feel like it's the mechanism, the channel that this throughput happens from today is a short-term view. But we found very clearly, unless there's government intervention in relation to this, the industry itself can't finance the cyber requirements because they're too busy trying to save massive infrastructure and big infrastructure businesses that are critical to the modern Australian economy.
Yeah, Steve, I want to thank you for joining us on the program. Just to finish, tell us a little bit more about the team you work with and the results you guys are gunning for, just before we let you go.
I think the thing that we aim for primarily at Blockchain APAC is to bring experience from other jurisdictions back to Australia. I think the thing that often creates inertia or moves things along very quickly in jurisdictions like Australia is paying attention to what other people are doing. If you think you don't have to worry because your head's always down and you're looking at your own shoes, you tend not to take advantage of the opportunities. Whereas when you pay attention to what's happening on the horizon, it tends to prompt activity. So our role has been to bring attention to Australia and vice versa, to bring opportunities, if they can't be had in Australia, into other jurisdictions, because I think that's the natural tension that means that you get good economic outcomes.
Steve Vallas, thank you so much for joining us on the program and providing your insights here to Carol and I, and of course our audience as well.
Pleasure. Thank you.
There you go, some interesting stuff out of Steve there, gosh.
Yeah, listen, man, he's a legend. Thank you very much, Mr. Vallas.
And of course, thank you to everybody who's been tuning in. We will, of course, be back with Crypto Corner right here on Ticker. Head to tickernews.co for more. And of course, be sure to check out the team at BTC Markets for more information as well. All right, we'll see you again soon. Be well.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.